Conflict parties in the face mask debate. Use a decision-making tool to determine who are the primary parties and who has what type of power. Face masks. Who needs them? Primary parties include people at increased risk of harm from COVID-19, people for whom PPE is an essential part of work role, people with a history of trauma or breathing difficulties, interest groups including Reignite Democracy Australia, led by Regina Smith, and anti-mask protest groups. The intervening parties include the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Health Officers for each state and territory, and police officers. The secondary parties include state and federal members of Parliament, medical professional bodies such as the RACGP, manufacturers of personal protective equipment, and owners of businesses for whom remaining open relies on mandatory mask wearing. The interested parties include people at relatively reduced risk of harm from COVID-19, people for whom masks are not available, and people with hearing loss. Examples of the types of power used by the parties. The primary parties tend to be people who are at risk of the disease. They have personal, informal, individual and situational power, or people who can't or won't wear masks. They have personal, informal, individual and social and situational and illegitimate power. The intervening parties have formal, expert, legitimate, individual and social power because they're representatives of authority. The secondary parties tend to be expert, legitimate, situational and social because they're groups who represent members of the community. And the interested parties tend to be illegitimate and individual. They're people who have the potential to be socially distanced. So masks aren't really an issue for them. As far as I can tell, people who have symmetrical power are those who are at increased risk of harm from COVID-19 and people with a history of trauma or breathing difficulties for whom mask wearing might cause psychological or physical distress. So they're kind of on the same footing. Whereas people who need PPE as an essential part of their work role have a more legitimate type of power as opposed to the interest groups who have an illegitimate form of power. Therefore, that represents asymmetrical power or unequal power.